Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Episode 92, The Celestial Way with Chris Warnock. We interviewed Chris back in March of 2021, and you can check that out if you'd like to hear his story. I think that was episode 24. And Chris is a teacher of mine. I've taken finished 2 courses of his, Astrological Magic and Horary Astrology. And in this episode, we're going to talk about his new book, The Celestial Way, which is basically a program of spiritual practice for the astrologer. Now, he's going to be doing a keynote this weekend at astromagia.org, and I will also be doing a presentation that I'm really excited to be doing. And my presentation is going to be on 17th century astrologer physicians in England. So if you want to check that out, go to astromagia.org, and that's going to be this upcoming weekend. It's October 8th through 10th. So if you're listening to this past that date, don't worry about it. But anyway, let's get to the interview. Okay, so this is episode 92 of the Plant Cunning Podcast, and we are very excited to have Christopher Warnock back on the show. Christopher is one of my teachers. I've taken 2 of his courses, and it was phenomenal courses. He's also written many books, and you can go ahead and listen to that previous podcast if you want to hear his background. But without any further ado, let's welcome Chris Warnock. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you guys?
Good.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Getting ready for that winter. It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I was talking to this worker. I take walks, and I think he was from Central America or something. And I was saying, "Oh, it's really dry." I said, "Yeah, it's the dry season." See, that's what they have.
Oh, yeah.
Is they have wet season and dry season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so in Iowa, we're like switching, I think, instead of having spring, summer, winter, fall, I think we're switching to wet season, dry season, which is a lot of dry.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, you guys with your plant stuff are obviously way tuned into that. And it's just like, when you are that more attuned, you see these stuff going on. You see the changes, and the climate change stuff is really, really obvious if you're at all paying attention.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in some ways, like, there are a lot of downsides. There are also, we're planting some plants that are, we wouldn't be able to plant 10 years ago, for instance. So
it's the change. It's the change that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable. And it's not what people are used to.
Yeah.
And so that's also, if it's widespread drought everywhere, that's a problem.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons I like the Northeast, because we water.
Yeah.
We did have a drought this summer, so
we're kind of on the edge of the plain stuff, so we're getting a lot of that. But it's funny because astrology, is really about orienting yourself, and it's mostly focused on temporal.
Yeah.
But it also has a locational. It's not so much like a feng shui, right? But it has the capacity to do that. So it's it's just that awareness and being. And it's funny because I was outside yesterday and it was like looking at the moon and stuff, which people that's, oh, you look at the moon. I'm like, not as an astrologer. It's like being a cardiologist, not a a radiologist. Radiologist never looks at patients, right? They're only look at MRIs and X-rays, and that's why astrologers, we don't look at the sky, we look at charts, But nevertheless, you go out there and you're like, oh, okay, there's this loss of orientation. That's really, I think, typical of modern. And that's where astrology can be really, really helpful. But just being outside and growing, you have to be that's why I like the landscaping stuff. I do all this stuff because it's like you're like responsible for all these people, and they're growing and everything. And, like I have my rhododendrons are like they have a tendency to kind of die off. And I'm like, is it overwatering? Is it underwatering? I'm just like, it's just, but like, oh no, I feel responsible for all these plants and everything. And I think that's part of it. It's all part of that similar process. And that's kind of what my book was about too, is looking at these underlying patternings and connections. And our loss of connection is really what the modern society really suffers from in many ways.
Yeah, and I think that this is so important. And you see a lot of people talking about animism lately. But what really it's about is relationship, and like all being in relationship with all of these people. Plants are people, the moon is a person, and we've lost that in the modern
I
world.
mean, it's a model,
Yeah,
it's an approach. And
yeah,
calling it animism is like, ew, it's sort of like like the bug on a pin thing. Like, I remember that, like, the scientific stuff, you go in this museum and it's full of dead whatever. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's kind of horrific, and that's their view of it, is kill it, stick it on a pin, and then you've got it. You know what I
right.
mean? And so it's this dead individual thing, as opposed to that's just part of this living reality. So, I mean, the animism, again, the labeling, I mean, that's where I'm at, basically. That's my model, and it's
Right.
personifications, but it's like seeing what I consider to be I or you as a person is itself an abstraction, and it's like the limitation of I mean, that's not real. In the Buddhist view, there's no individual self, right?
Right.
So, to think of a good example of that is Mother Nature, which the scientists love to throw that around. It's like,
Mhm.
what? I mean, or another one I was reading recently was talking about pine trees, conifers, and it said, well, the conifers, they're evolved earlier than the angiosperms, right? The flowering plants. And so they kind of got outcompeted by the deciduous angiosperms, like in North America. So I said, what the pines decided, and they said, put this way, they said, what the pines decided to do was go into mountains and then go into fire-prone areas, and they adapted to be able to deal with fire, and live in these mountains. Now, wait a second, you're ascribing this intelligence to this group, this entity, right? And if you call them on it, they, oh no, well, that's not blah 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 blah, random mutation, blah blah blah, it just happened. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's a reasonable modeling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
For that is to say that pine trees as a whole are a thing,
Yeah.
right? They're entity. It's even, and not even the individual pine tree necessarily. I mean, you can look at individual pine tree as a person too, but and that's what that God's, it's like, okay, this is the God. Well, it's not really real. It's a metaphor. I'm like, no, 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 no. I mean, like I'm a metaphor,
Right.
right? I
Mm.
mean, it's like, but you can interact with me perfectly reasonably, with that model. So that's what I would say about it. Is a lot of what I'm talking about is like, okay, we do not have to determine the absolute objective reality, because in my view, there isn't one. But that doesn't mean it's anything goes either.
Right.
So it's all modeling, more or less is a functional way of looking at things. It's going to be from a particular perspective, and it's workable,
Yeah.
is kind of the approach. But the animistic stuff is interesting because it took me a long time to work into that. My wife kind of has it sort of naturally, right? And so, but for me, it was a long time coming. And that's one of the reasons I liked traditional astrology, because it's based on traditional philosophy and a traditional, what's a spiritual worldview. So it's consistent all the way through. Whereas what you see nowadays is people have what I call unconscious atheistic materialism, and they layer whatever, quote, spiritual or magical stuff over the top of that. So atheistic materialism, and I have a whole chapter in my book, and I tried to be really clear about it. One of the things I like about Buddhism is that they try to be very, very clear. So I try to kind of follow that example about worldview, and then what the atheistic materialistic worldview is. And there's a lot of because different people call it different things. Like some people call it materialism, which to me sounds a bit like being greedy. You're materialistic, right? As opposed to atheistic materialism, which is how I define it, is that this is a worldview that, first of all, what's a worldview? So worldview is your conscious philosophy, but also your unconscious assumptions about reality.
Yeah.
And so really it is your reality.
Yeah.
But what's crazy about worldview is that there can be different ones. And that's that's the big stumbling block for most people, is because reality is reality. And my reality is reality. And what you think is reality, if it differs from me, you're crazy. You're just insane. And so there's not alternate worldviews. There's just reality. And so that's problematic because it's unconscious. So the worldview is, and it's not something that you choose. It's something that on one hand is generally given to you by your society, by your upbringing, maybe your personality, your family. And really what's happening is you are an instantiation of worldview.
Mm.
So rather than I have a worldview, I mean, really the worldview is the unit and you're just kind of an individual manifestation of it. But you can think about it. I mean, how many times have you ran into somebody who said, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, yeah, I read that New York Times article too.
Uh-huh.
And it's they got this opinion and they're really blah, 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 blah about it. And
Just
it's
regurgitating it. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, but it's my opinion. It's like, that's an obvious example of that is because, and the number of people that contact me, and they're the 10,000th person to have exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
Like, for example, can you use astrology for the stock market? It's like, yeah, you're the only person who ever thought that. Just the light went off and it's like, and my answer is basically, I mean, maybe somebody else can, but I can't. If they could, why would they tell you?
Yeah.
Right. If you could make billions of dollars and you're a brilliant stock picker, right? Why would you tell? I mean, if I could sell it, there's a lot of people selling stock systems and everything, but hope springs eternal. That's another thing. It's like lottery. Do not tell people they're not going to win the lottery. Just get them very upset, taking their hope away.
Mm-hmm.
This is their solution, and it's like, they don't want to hear that. So, but anyhow, that's what I was saying is that, and I'm the same way. I'm like, I have some weird stuff. I have weird models and everything, but I still am not unique, special. You know what I mean? I'm unique like a snowflake.
Well, so there may be an objective world, but
no, I don't think so. How would you know? How would you have any idea whether would there be or not?
Right, exactly. Well, exactly. There could be one, but everyone has their worldview worldviews as goggles in between them and
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I don't think that's true. We'd have no evidence there's an objective reality.
Well,
the only evidence
also don't have any evidence that there isn't.
But that's far different from saying, I mean, there's no evidence I'm Superman. Well, there's no evidence I'm not Superman. You know what I mean? Which of those is more persuasive? Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm Superman. Well, you don't have invulnerable. You can't fly. But you can't prove it. You can't prove I'm not Superman.
Well, again, I'm not saying that there is an objective reality, but there could be one. It's possible.
Why do you want it? The reason that you want to say that is because you come out of an atheistic materialistic view with scientists that insist there is. So we're pulled towards that because we want to believe in that. Right. But if we were to step away from it and just open and say, okay, because here's the thing, what you are in contact with is your mind. And when you see something, what's happening is the light rays are hitting the retinas and then they're being converted to electrochemical impulses and they're going to the brain and then they're being perceived by the mind, however you want to play with that, right? So the thing that you see is not in your head, right? You have no direct perception of it. Everything is being perceived in mind.
Yeah, right? Everything is mediated. There's always a mediation of.
But I wouldn't say mediated either, because it's created. And if you think about it's funny because I did this new talisman. I don't have an example of it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Now look at her face, right? Now, only thing that's shown on her face is her eyes and her lips, but your mind fills in all of it.
Yeah.
It looks like a totally realistic, hyper-realistic drawing of her face, doesn't it? But your mind, look at that carefully and how much of your mind is filling in that image. Yeah. Right. And that's true of reality. Right. It's all being filled in. Like memory is just like not a camera. It's just like completely recreating stuff, It's like, that's why witness testimony is so all over the place, And so that's what I would say is if we just focus on what we actually know and actually experience, we're just, you know what I'm saying? Then it really undermines the view. I mean, there could be, I don't know, there's all sorts of stuff, there's all sorts of possibilities, right? But in terms of just empirically, what are we in contact with? It's subjective. But if you want to think there's an objective reality, that's your trip. You can do that. I mean, that's what atheistic materialism, and that's the thing about it is that what I would say about that, like the scientist, right? So what you do, and again, I should talk about atheistic materialism. Atheistic materialism is the view that nothing exists except matter and energy. And of course, those are the same, right? E = mc squared. They're just forms of each other, but nothing else exists other than that. So if you want to think like a thought, what's a thought? Okay, a thought is electrochemical impulses in the brain, right? And that can be broken down to, molecules and atoms and subatomic particles and, whatever. That's really what we're talking about is, this interaction of these subatomic particles, And so you talk God, obviously there's no God. Obviously, there's no soul. Obviously, there's no spiritual connection things. There's no angels, none of that stuff. Telekinesis, all that stuff is just all not true. And it's like, because obviously there's nothing except matter and energy. There couldn't be anything else. Just that's the way, it's reality. And so that's the predominant worldview of moderns, and we all come out of that. I mean, we're sort of swimming around in that, and people will have an intuitive pull or be made in a different, like I said, my wife was always very animistic, right? But philosophically, if you push people on it, they'll typically, they have to arrange things in terms of the atheistic materialism. And that's still how people see things. So for example, a good example of that, sort of reverse engineering, is people are always, contacting me. And in fact, I have a whole page on zodiacs. And they're like, why are you using the tropical zodiac? It's bogus because it doesn't conform to the material stars. But the fact is the tropical zodiac is oriented to the seasons, right? So for example, when you go on the weather report and they say it's the first day of spring, what it's really saying is the sun entered Aries. They don't want to say that, but that's exactly what it is. And so what happens is the sun goes into Aries on the spring equinox, close to the spring equinox, into Cancer on the summer solstice, when the sun stops its apparent movement towards the north and then starts going south again. And then the fall equinox is Libra, sun enters Libra. And then Capricorn, when sun goes to Capricorn, is winter solstice, when the sun stops going to the south and starts going back to the north again. So it's oriented to the seasons. And then the meaning of all the signs is very seasonal. Like Aries is like hot, moving quickly, change, things like that. So that's not crazy. And but see, they want to throw all that out because it doesn't fit the material stars, because matter is the ultimate truth tester, because that's all there is, right? So if you want to find out whether something's true or not, you test it against a material object or a material thing. And that's just very logical, but that's unexamined. It's just automatic. And if you ask people about it, they're like, oh no, I'm a spiritual person. But you still have to use them. That's constellational zodiac is the best. So this is what's going on in a lot of time. Like New Age stuff is that way too, or like, yeah, go ahead.
So what is spirituality to you?
Okay. So that's a big question. So this is the thing, is it's non-material, non-energetic, right? So that's like, okay, whoa, that's kind of crazy. So what you can start thinking about it, a lot of it is you don't want to be just conceptualizing it, because if it's just playing with it as concepts, right? This is again what an academic does. Like a philosophy professor now would tell you about Plato or whatever, but it's obviously garbage, right? It's not really true. I mean, because we know what the truth is, an objective reality, and it's matter and energy. And they wouldn't even necessarily say that, but that's what's underlying the approach. So, I mean, let's give some examples of it. So one of the ones I like to use is, like, if you think of an African savanna, an African savanna has a carrying capacity, ecological carrying capacity. So even before there's any life there, you've got a certain amount of sunlight, you've got a certain amount of rain, you got certain nutrients in the soil, you got a certain amount of space. And so you have niches, ecological niches already built in. So the carrying capacity is like whatever, 1 million tons of vegetative biomass, and then 100,000 tons of herbivore biomass, and then 1,000 tons of predator biomass, right? And that's already preset before anything even is living there. And so when life comes along, it's got all these categories that it's like an ice cube tray, you can pour it in there. It's already there. And so another example is convergent evolution. So you think of a Tasmanian devil, right? It looks like a wolf. It's a marsupial, right? It's not at all related to wolves, but because it's fulfilling the same ecological niche, it looks the same and it acts the same, right? Life is poured into these niches that are pre-existing. And
it's like an idea.
Yeah, the whole ecological web of interrelationships pre-exists any life being there at all. So that's one way to think about it. Another one is, if you go to Sufism and Islamic mysticism, they talk about the 99 beautiful names of Allah. And Allah has infinite names, but the 99 beautiful names are the it's most respectful to call him or her or whatever. It's not really gendered by these names. So the 99 beautiful names, like Ir-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate. So like every time you start something, it's Bismillah Rahman Rahim, in the name of the merciful and the compassionate. So each of these names, though, has two sides, because, like, for example, Arab is the Lord, but to be the Lord, Allah needs a servant. So the God, the Allah as the Lord, cannot exist without the servant, and the servant needs a Lord, obviously, to exist. The relationship is spiritual, right? You can't see that anywhere, right? But that a physical example of that is like fathers and sons, like fatherhood. Where's fatherhood? I see fathers and sons, but I don't see fatherhood. That's an inherent relationship, right? And these built-in inherent relationships are spiritual. That's spirituality. So, or the Platonic ideas. I was reading this guy, he studied math, like he was 65 and decided he wanted to learn math. So he learned all this math. And he said, the problem is deciding whether math is it's created by humans or whether it's the Platonic ideas of these shadowy ghosts in some other place. And I'm like, dude, you don't understand at all what you're talking about, because the Platonic ideas are not physical. They're not in some other location. They're right here, right now. They're the underlying patternings of reality, you know? And so it's, and thinking of it, like I said, in terms of these relationships is really a useful way of thinking about it and the patterning. But if you want to go further with it, if you look at the spiritual traditions, and philosophies like Hermeticism or Taoism or whatever, they're based on unity. They're based on the one. And so while there's apparent diversity, there's in fact unity. Because if you're talking about different types of causality, it's all individual things bumping off each other and connecting to each other. That's not really. So ultimately, my favorite model right now for reality that I'm working as a model is what I call dream causality, right? So if you think of like you're having a dream and you see there's a hill and a rock rolls down the hill and hits a bottle, right? And smashes the bottle. What's going on? Was it really a rock? Was it really smashing the bottle? It's like, no, the unity is because there's one dreamer, right? The unity is a unity of consciousness. And in fact, there is, when you think about a dream, the I in the dream is a dream character, just like the other, people in the dream. They're no real, there's not you, right? It's not your physical body. It's like, it's just that it's what in Buddhism or Hinduism, they call manas, the I sense, right? So really what you have is the dream and awareness of the dream, and they're interconnected. And so that's ultimately the spiritual, for me, it's because from a Buddhist perspective, it's awareness.
Right. And so that also takes us to the swampy morass of, like modern non-dual teachings, which I have found to be very, very, very helpful in some ways, but also there are a lot of non-dualists who are just kind of mucking about, not really saying.
And that's where I had my, I can't say where the Kensho experiences were experienced, and they don't frame it as Kensho. I think they call it awakening or whatever. But since I'm coming from a Zen Buddhist background, that's how I conceptualize it, which Kensho is like a taste of no self.
Yeah.
Right? And so the non-dual stuff is useless unless you have the experience, right?
Right.
And so the primary experience there is going to be no self, right? And so, which is a little hard to explain to people because that's their most central reality, is that of me, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. It's like, wait a second, as soon as you say I, then you don't need to, that's kind of a nonsensical statement. You're already assuming the I,
right. And then
you're not proving anything with that.
Right.
But the non-dual, the problem with the non-dual from my perspective is that they tend to want to reinvent the wheel, being modern people, and they disrespect the traditions, and they're not necessarily rooted in the traditions. In fact, they're rebellious against tradition.
Right. There's this
do it themselves, and they don't have like the bodhisattva thing. Non-dualists will be like, well, nothing really exists, so I can do whatever I want. And I'm like, dude, you just don't even, you know what I mean? Just like, you need to like study and work with the stuff. But at the same time, I was doing Zen, and those guys didn't believe there was enlightenment.
Right.
Yeah. I'm like, I love the ritual, I love the prep and everything, but I was not advancing in terms of becoming enlightened. And so the modern non-dual, I was able to have somebody direct point for me. And so that was very helpful. So that is very much, I think the modern non-dual is the most vibrant, cutting edge, modern spiritual approach. It, like anything else, has its problems, but it's like, it is the best. Now, you've got all the different possible paths. You've got a bhakti path, which are devotional paths. You've got the Nanda yoga, which is inquiry, like non-dual stuff, Advaita Vedanta, Kashmiri Shaivism. You've got tantric, all these different approaches, which are all valid if that's your thing. It's just that for me, this is what the problem I had with the book was that I wanted to talk about spiritual astrology, but my enlightenment experiences have all been inquiry path, not, whereas the astrological magic astrology is more of a tantric path, really. It's more of a theurgic path. And so what I recognized, though, was that people weren't even ready for kindergarten in terms of spiritual path. So my job was to be a kindergarten teacher and to basically do really the most preliminary basic stuff, which is acknowledging there is a spiritual realm, right, in a real way, and then coming into contact with it, and then giving people some devotional practices. So that's what I tried to do with the book, was to just, because someone in a traditional society would not need to be given all this background stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of sad that you have to like start with, there is a spiritual world.
Well, what even does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual to most people means good. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a good person. I mean, they're synonymous, or it means psychological. And psychological, like I said, is just brain chemistry.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what spiritual means. Spiritual is I drive a hybrid. You know, I drive a whatever, I have an electric car now, so I don't have to feel guilty about it.
And maybe before we go on too much, you can just tell us a little bit about the latest book, Celestial Way.
Yeah. So this is the paperback version of it. I hold it up. So a way, you know, in a do in Japan is like a traditional, like they talk about traditional crafts, but like Bushido is the way of the warrior, or Chado is the way of tea. And these are these practices and studies intermixed that are taken to a very high level of mastery, but are also seen as spiritual paths. So a very practical approach, but having a spiritual purpose. So that was kind of my inspiration for this, was like, can you use astrology as part of a spiritual path? And so, I mean, I had not become enlightened through astrology, so I can't say it's a complete right-hand spiritual path, but nevertheless, I think it has a lot of potential because of the fact that astrology and astrological magic are applied spirituality. I mean, they only work through the spiritual connection of all things. And so by working with them, I mean, I've done 5,000 horary. You know, I do about 100 horary and they turn out to be, no, not always right, but it's uncanny the way the horary reflects the situation. And you're like, wait a second, if everything's random, you know, nihilist modern stuff, nihilistic, you know, whatever, it's all random, how can it work? And so if it does work, then maybe reality isn't nihilist. Maybe it isn't just random. You know?
Yeah, and that's very important for people who don't even understand, like, what, you know, think of spirituality as just psychology or being good, because you have to have some sort of experience, some direct experience of something more meaningful than modern nihilism, you know, to even be able to for it to be real at all to you, you know.
I mean, this is the thing, is that again, the modern approach, it's very much academic, and the academic approach is to be objective, which is like you don't engage with a thing. Now, one of the things I love, for example, like I was trying to decide, remember, when I was in high school, between sociology and history, because I love sociology. One of the things I love about sociology is participant observation. And so people will go out and do things and then write about it. Like I have a couple of these, like one person, she's a professor, she became a garbage truck driver in New York. So she writes, it's very complex. I mean, garbage collection is incredibly complicated and incredibly important. It's probably the most important public service that the municipalities provide. Really complex. Or another guy who became a guard at Sing Sing. And so they're writing about it. So they're experiencing it, yet they have this professional background that allows them to be able to step back from it a little bit too. So that's, I think, is probably the ideal stance for things. But if all you're doing is like, oh, I'm studying about it, you know, particularly, it becomes particularly a problem for academic studies of astrology and magic. Because the problem is that since the official ideology is atheistic materialism, then astrology and magic are fiction, are fake.
Yeah.
And so how you study something that's fake, like I said, it's sort of like, you know, I don't know, like I said, again, I don't know how you can have a perspective about it if you think it's not even real. I mean, certainly from a practitioner standpoint, I have a problem with someone telling me I'm the expert, but what you're doing is fake.
Yeah.
So it's a little, but people still are very much caught by the academic approach. And so, you know, that's something I rant about to a certain extent. But I mean, I think it's like, you know, because people say to me, it's like, oh, well, so-and-so, you know, they're a magician. I'm like, well, there's no evidence of it in their professional work. It's a bit like being gay in the 50s. I mean, if you come out, you're going to be thrown out, you know, otherwise you have to hide it. But it's like, you cannot publish a peer-reviewed journal, academic or scientific journal, and say that angels are real or magic works. You're not going to be permitted to do that because this is fake.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, you're irrational. I mean, I saw people like, oh no, it's true. And I got the National Science Foundation thing about astrology, like, well, only credulous people believe in this pseudoscientific garbage. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the official US government scientific approach, is that it's fake. And so that's the first thing that people have difficulty facing up to, is that, I mean, I love it, I'm into it, but to me, the prestigious things in my society are academics and science,
Mhm.
right? It's like science and religion are coming together. It's like they cannot come together. They've been at war with each other since the 18th century, you know. And part of what I talk about is what I call the truce.
Mhm.
And the truce is that the scientific elites, the academic elites, the atheistic materialists are allowed to determine the nature of reality. But if you're religious, you can compartmentalize it and believe in God, but you still let them determine the nature of reality. So again, it's very compartmentalized. So I believe in God, but everything else is, you know, scientific, you know? And so it's not very logical. That's why the few hardcore atheists get really upset, because they're like, everybody knows there's not a God. It's like, yeah, you know, but basically everyone is allowed to be doublethink. Now, it doesn't apply to astrology though, because like, for example, if you're Catholic, no one's going to attack you for believing in transubstantiation, right? But astrology, they're going to come after you. And which I had the problem as a lawyer. The bar came after me. I had to fight them off. They wanted to disbar me for being an astrologer.
Wow.
Basically.
Yeah.
Which everyone's like, what? I'm like, you don't understand what the way that the elites are. They'll tolerate in the masses this hysteria. That's okay with them. But
Yeah.
if you try to say it's real, right? Now it's interesting, like in New York, it's a felony to do astrology and say it's real, but if you say it's entertainment, it's okay. So that's the purest expression of that.
Yeah,
It's like if you say it's real, you're a felon. They just let everybody do it. They don't enforce that, but that's the way the law reads. So
so what is really cool about this book is you're saying you're offering a spiritual practice in astrology to get the training wheels and to experience the higher realms. That's a way of saying it.
Yeah, basically.
But so in going back to non-dualism, one of the problems I see in contemporary non-dual, especially in the United States, non-dual teachings, is this idea that, well, this may be true ultimately, if there is an objective reality anyway, but like, yeah, you don't exist and nothing that you do can make you enlightened. So just drop everything and then you're enlightened. And that, I think, and that's not what most people, that's not what I think the real deal people who are actually, I guess, say, but that is in the non-dual scene. Like if you look at like Buddha at the gas pump, that just comes up time and time again.
Well,
and
Rick talks too much anyways.
But
he does an interview by talking about what his own opinion is half the time. But I mean, he's great. I like Rick Archer. He's got to expose a lot of people. But it's like, here's what I would say about that is that they're muddling, because here's the thing, in Buddhism they talk about upaya, skillful means, right? And so there's a story about the Buddha, and he's like, he's got these children inside the house, and the house is on fire. He's got to get them out of the house. So if he goes in and says it's on fire, they'll freak out and they won't be able to get out of the house. So he does goes in. He says, you know what? Outside there's these great carts. You're gonna love them. They'll be awesome. You can play in the cart. Let's go outside and you can play in the cart. And they're like, okay, cool. They go outside. And so he saves them from the burning building. And then the carts are the vehicles, you know, the Hinayana, Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, or however you want it. So he's like, he lied to them, but he needed to tell them, give them, because he only had their best interests at heart. He wanted to help them. He knew if he said the place is on fire, they were going to freak. So he gave them the message that was appropriate for the level of understanding that they're at. And not in a negative way. He wasn't trying to manipulate them or screw them over or anything. He's trying to help them. So that's what upaya is skillful means. And you give people a knowledge that's appropriate to their level of understanding that they can actually use, right? Yeah. And so to say to a regular person from an atheistic materialistic viewpoint that you're not there and there's nothing you can do is not very helpful for them.
Right. Yeah.
It is useful though for somebody who's had these experiences of no self and is then trying to do, like, I'm going to meditate really hard and that'll be enlightened that way. It's like, in fact, the ego self, it's not true that the ego self can do nothing, right? Towards enlightenment. What the ego self can do is get out of the way. The ego self can be willing to be other than it is. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. As opposed to, I'm going to be enlightened. It's like, the ego self is never going to be enlightened. But the ego self's like, okay, I'm willing to, because I'll give an example sort of that. I was like, before I met my non-dual, I won't exactly call him a teacher, he was a pointer. I was doing Zazen, sitting meditation, 40 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes in the evening. It was a lot of Zazen. And it's like, it's helpful from the standpoint of like relaxing me or whatever, sitting still, but it didn't make me enlightened. But what it was I was willing. It was a very conscious manifestation of my willingness Like I'm willing to do this, like an austerity, it's like I'm willing to do this to show that I'm ready. And it's like maybe it has nothing to do directly with it, but it's also what it is manifesting is a willingness to be other than what I am.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say about it, is that the usefulness of being grounded in a tradition is like Buddhism, for example, is there's been thousands of people that have come before you that have thought about it. And you don't have to try to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but it doesn't, obviously Buddhism isn't for everybody, right?
Right.
But it's like, it's a fully worked out system in a lot of ways that you can, you don't have to try to figure everything out for yourself. Whereas again, the modern non-dual is like, oh, I don't need all that stuff. I'll just make it up myself. And it ends up being the same old rehash, new age, foolishness. And that's the problem, is I think. But
they also oftentimes I've heard this said a lot, that no practice will get you there. So no practice is useful. That argument. And I find that, as
that's
you were
not
saying,
true though. It's not true, because it's like my non-dual teacher, he like had a sequence of stuff he had a sequence he went through with most people, right? Of basically, he's almost like cross-examination, like ask you these questions, like, what about this? What about this? What about that? And if you go through that sequence with him and you're ripe, then you pretty much everybody had Kensho experiences.
And that ripeness is key, though. And I think that to get that ripeness takes practice and takes.
Well, it's grace.
Well,
it's a combination of, it's like I said, you can look at the outside of it and say, oh, this is grace, or oh, this is effort. But the reality is it's too complicated to figure out what it is. And it's like, not everyone who chased the gazelle caught it, but no one who didn't chase the gazelle caught it.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, effort is necessary at some point.
Yeah.
But the relaxation of effort is also necessary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
if you want to follow blindly either one of those approaches, then it's not gonna be successful.
Yeah.
So it's like, and what's the point of being enlightened anyway? It's like the reason you're enlightened is because it's like, why does a hawk fly? Because a hawk flies because it's meant to fly, right? The horse runs because it's meant to gallop. It's like people that become enlightened, that's just your thing. But it's not better to be enlightened than unenlightened. It's all equally, ultimately the same. We all have the Buddha nature, right? Everything is the Buddha nature, and everything is of the same value, So ultimately you become enlightened because that's your Dharma. But that's not like, oh, we got to get enlightened. Oh, got to get to work. That's a good American thing. Got to get to work, get me something to do and work hard and I'll achieve everything. It's like, and they just take that right over to the spiritual realm and start, working away at it, so I'm meditating really hard. And when's it going to happen? And,
I know I've been there for sure.
So, but that's like, ultimately it doesn't matter. It's like, it's just like, it's not, all this is equally valuable. It's more fun. I don't like failure, but it's like, it's certainly, awareness doesn't care.
It's true.
Well, I like the non-dual stuff. Good for you. It's like, I haven't had anyone give me that kind of high level.
Well, that's where I'm
it's like, well, this is like really like pretty sophisticated stuff. Cause most people are just like, well, I don't like Jesus. I was abused as a child and I don't like Christianity. So I'm like, okay. That's valid. I don't like a lot of this fundamentalist stuff. I can't stand. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Somebody talking about non-dual. I'm like, whoa.
Well, that was my first spiritual, tradition, is actually basically a non-dual tradition.
Oh, that's not a good start then.
Well, yeah. So then I had to get into
better as like graduate school. Non-dual is like a grad levels thing, and you've tried. That's what Again, that's what I did. I was doing all the Zen and Sufism and stuff like that. So it's like,
yeah.
But
well, yeah. So I needed to practices. And the tradition that I come from, there are there are practices to do. You should be meditating every day. You should be doing these things, but there's not like a system, and I think a lot of people really do need like a system to get started.
That's what I'm talking about. The non-dual. See, non-dual is like Zen or Dzogchen.
Yeah.
It's direct pointing.
Right. Yeah.
That's what it is. It's like direct pointing, and it's like, that's the real value of it. But that takes a really advanced, practitioner to be able to be ready for to be conscious of the direct pointing of reality when it's pointed out to them.
So is this what the role of, or can be the role of magic on the spiritual path, is to open people up to the spiritual plane and to ripen them a little bit?
Yeah, that's what I mean. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, how do you get yourself ready to follow a spiritual path, right? And before you follow a spiritual path, you have to, just like you asked me, what's spirituality? I'm like, well, you got to understand that. And then once you have a concept of it, then you need to encounter it. So it's a lived reality for you. And then my recommendation, I mean, even though I have a strong inquiry path, is that the bhakti stuff, the devotional stuff is really useful. Everybody probably needs that in their spiritual path. And so the devotion, because that's my approach to astrological magic, is very devotional.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be, but I mean, I'm more of a celestial priest than I am an astrological magician. And again, there's nothing wrong. It's like, because there's a pejorative, or there's a tendency, these labels, it's like it's good or bad. And obviously I prefer what I do, obviously, but it's not like there's a best way or a wrong way to do it. But so my approach, even with making a talisman, is, okay, we're invoking an angel and we're asking for a connection, and we're being respectful, and we're hanging out with them and getting the benefit of that. And it's self-transformational as well as transforming I mean, a love talisman, people think of it, get me a girlfriend or whatever, get me a boyfriend. It's like, well, how about transforming yourself so you're a more loving person?
Right.
Right.
Those are both, if both of those are worthwhile, but it's like, that's more of the focus. And then, so I have a list of some of the practices I have, devotional practice, like the daily planetary practice.
Yeah.
So that is basically a devotional practice where every day of the week is ruled by a planet. That's where the week comes from, is from planets. So moon day is the moon, Sunday's the sun, Saturday, Saturn. And then on that day, what I basically do is light a candle and some incense and do a really brief invocation of the planet that rules the day. And you could use the planetary hour too, if you wanted to. I mean, it doesn't fit with my schedule because I like to do it in the evening. And so it's what I call a low intensity practice, which is that you're only timing one thing, like the day or maybe the hour. So it's not you're not getting a heavy dose of the power of that planet. So it's low intensity, but it's very repetitive. It's like drip, 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 drip. I've been doing it for 15 years. And so it's helped me build up a very strong connection to the planetary angels. And so, that's a good example of a devotional practice. And see, if you make a talisman, done high and low intensity, a talisman, when I'm looking at a chart that's got multiple factors. So a sun talisman might be sun rising or sun culminating, sun in Leo or Aries, sun hour, and then sun unafflicted. That's a very strong sun. So I call that's a high intensity practice. You're getting a very intense, experience of the solar energy or power, however you want to conceptualize it, with that talisman. And but it doesn't come up very often. I mean, these high intensity moments that you're sort of capturing in a talisman, maybe for like 45 minutes or an hour at most, it's only going to come up, twice a year, three times a year with that sun. And so
then Jupiter or
exactly, that might take a longer time. So the nice thing about the low intensity practice is that you don't have to worry about the interaction, like whatever your natal or whatever, any kind of contraindications for it. And it's the power is from the repetition. And so, because there's a tendency like, what's the most powerful? Yeah, that's the greatest. It's like, well, you just see what's appropriate to your circumstances. So, and then planetary charity is another one, which is that this is kind of adapted from Vedic astrology. So it's like you make a vow to the planet, at their hour, usually their day and hour, but at least their hour, and you say, I'm going to, donate whatever, just, you could do 7 or 3 or whatever. There's certain numbers that are appropriate for the planets to appropriate, like a charity or person. Like, so for Saturn, you could do a homeless person. I mean, it's almost a lot of places, sadly, we live, you could easily find a homeless person. So every Saturday, Saturn hour, you'd make a donation to a homeless person or a charity. A lot of times people do online because that's easier. It may not be able to arrange for that kind of stuff. And so that's a way of kind of improving your relationship with the planet. And so if you make the vow, you don't want to break it. Right. That's the thing, is it's important to do that. I mean, it's like having a friend, you don't get along, you've had an argument with them and you're like, I'm going to come over, and then you don't come over. Like, it's not making it any better.
Right.
Might as well, you promised and broke it. You don't even make the promise in the first place. So it's important it's not like deadly though. That's another thing people get really freaked out about. Like, oh no, it's like, do your best, be respectful. If something comes up, the planets are relatively, they're angels. but it's like, don't just, oh, I forgot. It's like,
Yeah.
that's
But that-
not,
So that's especially good for people who might have a planet in their chart that is not in a good position.
yeah.
Like in their fall. Or
Yeah, that's what saying afflicted planets. So that's a good way. You can do planetary for any planet, no matter
Right.
what they are in your chart, no matter what the affliction of it is. It's just it's a low, like it's very low intensity. It's also very respectful.
Yeah.
You're not asking for anything. Like, I like you, I want to get along better with you, and I'm doing this extra stuff. Whereas talisman, it's often like, gimme,
Sure.
So that's a less respectful. It's not bad. It's just, that you're just being super respectful with charity.
Mm.
So those are kind of the thing. Now, it's interesting because the daily planetary practice I don't even remember how I started doing it, but I did. I realized that Robert Zoller, who was kind of sort of one of my, philosophical magic teacher, didn't teach me practical magic. He has this handout that he gave me that was talking about the Huranian Sabians, which are the source of Picatrix, the planetary invocations. And he talks about they having something that sounded like the planetary practice, like at dawn on the day of the planet, you would like face the planet and prostrate and do this whole invocation of them. So it's like, I invented it, or it's sort of like, I don't know, manifested through me, sort of. It's like, obviously, I've been doing it for a long time. So, but see, a lot of the modern view is that you create everything, as opposed to the fact that a lot of times you're manifesting it.
Yeah.
And it's like an artist, or a novelist. They say the novel wrote itself.
Right. Yeah.
You're like, oh, haha, yeah, right. Your brain chemistry did it. But
Well, I'm a songwriter. It's just it definitely happens.
You understand how that works.
It's both. It's you're a vessel for it, but you have to have the personality makes it at the same time it's a channel.
You're not the ultimate. I mean, obviously, it's like you're like stained glass with light coming through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you're going to filter that depending on who you are and your perspective. But yeah, so that's what I mean, one of the things I feel like that, well, actually two areas. I mean, my main career areas, as a lawyer, I have a super strong sense of being a vessel of, particularly of the common law, which is our English legal tradition that's 1,000 years old. That's super strong, still is like the bedrock of our culture and everything. And the astrology too, and astrological magic, because I feel like another chain in the hermetic link of transmission. And so, I had someone saying, "Oh, your system." I'm like, not exactly. I'm just like, I have my own ways of doing things. Like but it's like a musician, if you learn, you're going to follow your teacher lick for lick. But at some point when you master it, you need to have some individuality. But if you change it too much, you're no longer in that genre anymore, which is not wrong. It's just like you're not playing the blues anymore. You could change it so much that's no longer fits into that, to that genre. And so that's, yeah, go ahead.
As someone that has had a devotional relationship for over 15 years, what is your relationship like with these planets? How has it evolved, or with these, beings?
I have a friend who's like has conversations.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, wow, I like that. Because I don't have anyone speaking to me. I don't have like, because that's another modern thing. Goes, well, do they appear to you like the jinn, out of a, the bottle, and that whole, invocation to physical appearance stuff they're obsessed with that. Because like physical reality is reality, right? So if it doesn't manifest in physical reality, it's not really real. But it's kind of hard on a spiritual being to expect it to manifest physically, because it's not physical. So I can't say that I have had like some spectacular, it'd be nice to have some spectacular stories about it, or have conversations. Everybody has a different range of it. But what I would say is that I certainly have a strong sense of like respect.
Yeah.
And the reality of them. It's like, and I feel really happy to have spread their venerate, because the worship is one of those loaded words because of the Christians, but veneration, the Catholics call it, what the saints or angels, you venerate them, you do them honor.
Yeah.
So like having spread that tremendously, it's like so many people are doing this stuff because so I feel really good about that. I feel like they need more respect. They don't get enough respect. So it's like,
cool.
That's also in terms of my like I have this nice house and middle class lifestyle. I feel like from the planets, from the celestial angels, obviously I had to work for it and everything, but I do feel like a lot of my success is coming from the fact that I have had such a strong devotion to them. So it's funny because people like, you see this sort of a magician approach is more like give me the stuff. You know,
Yeah,
it's more
like I'm
specific.
making this happen. This is
Yeah,
what we're
which
doing.
is okay. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not wrong. It's just that's a particular stance.
Mhm.
But it's funny because I've seen stuff say, well, like, you know, they say, well, the spirits are just doing what's best for me. Well, that's garbage. Give me what I want. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's the most effective way of getting stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because the American thing is like, okay, if you have a goal, rush at it at full force with maximum power, jam on it. And that's the best way to get stuff. And it's like, well, maybe not. I mean, if you want like the little animals to perch on your shoulder, you can't start lunging at them. You have to sit quietly and let them sit on your shoulder. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like picking up a cat and putting it on your lap. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things is like a lot of stuff, it takes a little more subtle approach to it, you know,
Mhm.
and you let things develop on their own. And so that's what I think about is like, you know, I just feel like I look at some people sometimes with the magicians, oh, I'm a sorcerer. And it's like, yeah, but you seem kind of down at the heels and not that successful financially. So it's like, I don't know. Whereas I'm like, you know, I mean, I didn't focus on money as my first thing, but it's like I seem to be doing pretty well. So,
Mhm.
you know, I wouldn't downplay the devotional approach as a reasonably effective way of actually getting material benefits either. I mean, again, but you can't focus on it as your main thing. It's one of those things is like, if you don't think of an elephant, you know, it's like, good luck with that. But it's like, I think that, you know, it's funny too, because we just had this on my group. Someone was posting about talismans for cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, well, I said, definitely in our traditional sources, there's lots of recipes for talismans that are supposed to affect the whole city.
So you're
Like,
saying make a talisman for a specific city,
yeah,
for a
and
specific
but it
thing?
affects supposedly affects the whole city. Now,
Okay.
like for example, Thabit ibn Qurra, who's a Iranian Sabian, has a book called Imaginibus, which is sort of like talismans, and has like, if you want to bless the city with prosperity, you want to
Mhm.
cause terrible things to happen in the city, you can do either different
Mhm.
elections. And then they had this other one, someone was posting about all these pest control. Like if you do this pest control one, there'll be no scorpions in the whole city. And I said, I don't think it's going to work.
Hmm.
I said, I just don't think it's that powerful, which is
Hmm.
not to say it's not powerful, you know? So that's what part of the problem is that like the Arabian Night, the 1001 Nights thing, you get that in your sources sometimes, you know, and they're kind of talking about, oh, I can do all this great stuff. I'm like, yeah, really? That's like people nowadays saying that, oh, Trump lost the election because I did a spell on him. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that your magic is that powerful that you're individually able to do that. Or I'm moving hurricanes around. Oh, I moved that hurricane. Just like, I mean, at the same time, it's funny. I was thinking about that because it's like, we have a cemetery near us, like 2 blocks away. And so I have this whole prayer thing. I go through the cemetery. And then in Japanese tradition, apparently, the first grave, the oldest person in the cemetery is like the guardian spirit of the cemetery.
Mm,
So
cool.
in this cemetery is almost 200 years old, which is really old for Iowa. And the Masons came back and did this new gravestone for the oldest grave. And so I was
Wow.
go to that and I'll basically, you know, ask to help the neighborhood, you
Mhm.
know, and so I think it's helpful, but it's sort of like my landscaping. I mean, I have this nicely
Yeah.
landscaped house,
So
which I think has a really nice subtle effect on the neighborhood. People like it when they walk by. The neighbors, I mean, neighbors next door, they moved in, they started planting stuff, you know. It's
Mm.
like that to me is a little more magical effect as opposed to the boom, instantly I get what I want. You know, Harry Potter,
Yeah.
lightning bolts, and that kind of stuff. I mean, part of it is like what your expectation. I was remember because Chris Brennan had me on his podcast, and he kept asking me stuff from pictures. So if you do this, then you know, showers of gold. Well, I said, nah, not really. He's like, oh, because he could, you know, like I said, the thing about magic is it's real. And
Right.
because it's real, it can't be instant or all powerful.
Mhm.
It's just not, that's not real. Things aren't able to do that. And it's like, it's much more subtle again, because you're dealing with these subtle underlying connections, right?
Yeah.
He's super powerful, but it's not necessarily going to be, you know, like bags of gold materializing that's going to be pretty hard to have that happen, you know?
Yeah.
On the other hand, you like the magic that's really rampant now. This a guy named Yon Kulianu, who was a divinity professor, wrote
Yeah.
Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, and he says
Right,
that the
right.
modern magician occupies himself with marketing and cryptography and, you know, propaganda and stuff like that, and that's really where we see, because that's incredibly powerful. Like
Yeah,
social
that's-
media, for example, is like basically built around hitting people's, you know, punching people's buttons. You know,
Yeah.
Right.
it's incredibly powerful at that, and that is magic. You know,
More like Kako magic, though.
it depends. I mean, you know, Hitler and Gandhi use the same
Ah.
methodology.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
true.
so it just depends on what your outcome, what your purposes of it. So it's
Sure.
like, um, So, but that's what I would say about it, is that what you recognize is that magic is not all powerful and it's not fake.
Yeah.
So you
Yes.
somehow find a balance in between those two of them, and then, it's,
Yeah.
go from there.
So another thing that you have in this book is like the genius or higher, the guardian angel, and because there's implications of that, and ways to find the angel of your nativity and things like in these old texts. Is what you're doing the same thing as like the Abremelin ritual? And is that, because you also hear sometimes people saying that like the knowledge and conversation of their holy guardian angel is like the same thing as enlightenment. And I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true. But what is there a connection? And like, what's your, yeah.
It's interesting because it's certain stuff gets popular, and then that's what everybody's basic idea of stuff is. So guardian angel is Abramelin,
Right,
that's basically like, that's what no one's ever heard of it. That's I think it takes like 6 months.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work for people.
Yeah.
And so conceptually, it seems to be like, okay, you do this thing and you meet this being, right?
Mhm.
This being appears, right? And then you can do magic really well. That's why you do it. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, that sort of seems to be the pop version of it, is like there's this other being, right, that you get in contact with if you do all this ceremonial stuff, and then you get stuff. It makes you a better magician. And so, the guardian angel stuff is obviously way broader than that. And so it's also, because like, who's my guardian angel? It's like, well, my view of it is that you have all sorts of spirits that are associated with you.
Yeah.
And
Right.
There's it's kind of it's a little bit of a mangling of a Talmudic saying, but it's like that, it's something to the effect of, there's not a blade of grass, but an angel blowing on it saying, grow, grow. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I think everything has a guardian angel in that sense. But there's also this view that, each of us, is under a particular planet.
Right.
And then like Plotinus talks about, well, you can get promoted from having a daemon, which is not a demon, but an intermediary spirit, to a god. If you increase the spiritual, you can move up, right? And so there's a lot, it's much more complex. Now, what's interesting about astrological stuff is that you can determine these names of basically it's a Time Lord. So if you look at your natal chart is going to be unique to anybody that's born with, say, in about 2 or 3 minutes of you within about 50 miles. Okay, because within that 2 to 3 time span, you have the same degree on the ascendant, and within 50 miles, you have the same degree on the ascendant. But if you move more than that away, or the timing, you're going to be different. So if you're in maybe Manhattan, it might be multiple people that were born at at that time. So essentially what that name is, and what you do is you look at certain points. So the typical ones that are like Agrippa uses are what called the high legal points, which are used for determining length of life. So they're the sun, the moon, the ascendant, the part of fortune, and then what's called the prenatal syzygy, which is a fancy name for either the full moon or new moon that was immediate previous to your birth. So look at those points, the degrees, right? So those, you can map them to a degree. And then what you do is you take each of the degrees and map them to a letter. And an easy way to do that is just start with 0 Aries and make that A, and 1 Aries B, 2 Aries C, and just go all the way through the alphabet. And so then it generates these letters, right? And so typically you often have to add vowels in or whatever, and I use English because I'm familiar with English. I mean, Hebrew, other people use Hebrew or whatever. I'm not familiar enough with Hebrew to use it. So it generates this name of a Time Lord. And so I was a little reluctant to call it the guardian angel, but I had 2 people tell me, and actually a really close friend of mine as well, say, you know what, I did the Abramelin, or I did this other stuff, and the names that the guardian angel used, at least one of the names corresponded to that name that you gave me from the chart. So I was like, okay, so there's an overlap between this Time Lord and the guardian angel stuff. So but where I think it gets really interesting is like, I mean, you can go with the like, okay, I invoke it and I get the stuff and it's a separate thing, right? Or, the other thing about it is that the guardian angel is you.
Yeah.
It's a higher self.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that's very interesting is the whole perfect nature discussion of
Right. Yeah.
which is probably the most theurgic that Picatrix gets. And so Picatrix talks about the perfect nature as being the spirit of the sage united with the spirit of the planet ruling in their chart. So it's a really interesting combination of, and they say this is the this is the secret of knowledge. So how is philosophy knowledge? How do you know anything? It's perfect nature. And so so there's this level of self-knowledge there, but in an astrological way.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I was thinking about with it is that, I was sitting there meditating and the sun was behind me and I was casting a shadow. So I was looking at the shadow and thinking, okay, this shadow is a 2D sort of picture of me, right?
Mhm.
And it's created by this whole confluence of events. I have to be sitting there at this angle, the sun has to be at this angle, the light has to come, and that produces this 2D thing.
Yeah.
So that's really just a confluence of all these different things, right? The shadow. But think about yourself as being the confluence of all these influences, particularly planetary influences. Like we think of ourselves as unique, but really we're just, if you look at your chart, you can see you're a combination of planetary influences.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's another way to think about that knowledge, and so that's like the guardian angel or whatever is your higher self, right? And it's in the perfect nature is really the higher self in a planetary scene, in a planetary perspective. So,
Cool.
so that's, again, I did that. This Pickatrix has this ceremony to do, and the timing is really rudimentary. It's like the moon in the first degree of Aries, 0 Aries. So I did it, and it's like, it has this interesting recipe for like only one other ritual is like most of the recipes in Pickatrix are like, okay, and then take a goat and cut its head off and things like that, which I don't do. But this
Yeah.
one's like, get all these different, like oil of almonds and all these different oils and flour and stuff. Actually, there wasn't any flour. It was all like oils and nuts. And that said, it sounds like cookies. So I gave all the ingredients to my wife and she made Pickatrix Perfect Nature cookies for me. So I put them on the altar and did all this stuff. And so I got high from it. I didn't have any like super, what I also noticed is because I pay a lot of attention to dream state, that I was more awake in my dream state than normal. I
Okay.
wasn't totally lucid, but felt like I was in much more of an awakened state. So there was a consciousness raising effect of it for me in a mild way. I'm afraid again that people do that ritual and expect, spectacular.
Yeah.
That
could be another thing where like repetition might deepen it. Like if
or not.
more okay.
It's just one of those things. It's like, it's just been like, again, my teacher or my pointer, the non-dual guy, he got very suspicious of people that had spectacular awakening experiences.
Yeah.
Because all the fireworks and stuff tend to detract from the awareness, and you tend to focus on the fireworks.
Right.
When it's the awareness, which is constant, right?
Mm.
Is because you're always aware, right? There's awareness is always present. It never changes, right? The contents are constantly changing, right? So if you get focused on the content, you miss the point, which is to be aware of awareness.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think that the perfect nature stuff, I guess, like I said, I don't want to oversell stuff.
Yeah.
It's good for marketing, but it's like,
it's better to have low expectations than high expectations.
yeah, I'd rather lower people's expectations too.
Yeah.
Also, it's sort of like, again, like I said, part of my frustration with this book was like, okay, I'm not enlightened entirely. I mean, if anybody is, I'm not sure. But second of all, I didn't get there through astrology.
Right.
So why am I writing this book? And I'm like, okay, no, there's a lot of it. It's the first step, and someone's going to have to come along and take the further steps with it. But I felt like, no, this is a firm foundation for it. And the theurgic, the perfect nature stuff is a really great, if you are advanced, right? And you've, like you guys, I'm like I said, like he could come back to, you're talking about non-dual, modern non-dual. I'm like, holy shit. Then the perfect nature stuff is certainly something, if you're interested in, that you could run with,
Cool.
and having that background, non-dual background, but also being interested in astrology and magic. It's like, yeah, that's definitely something to be thinking about and working with.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited for this book. It's right up my alley,
Yeah. Well, that's what my wife said to me. She said, it's kind of a niche thing. And I said, yeah, but for the people that are ready for it, it's like, wow, this is a trip,
Yeah.
And what I think, like I said, the key is so much of our modern stuff is in a state of unconsciousness. We're not aware of our philosophy, of our unconscious assumptions. We're coming from an atheistic materialistic perspective. We don't recognize it. And it's like we're trying to be new age spiritual, which is spiritual on top of this there's no spiritual reality, and then we're trying to be spiritual on top of it, and it causes a lot of confusion, and people's automatic assumption about things, like I said, goes material.
Yeah.
Again, if you ask people, how does astrology work, right? it's sunspots, magnetism. It's like, absolutely not. There's no scientific evidence of material energetic causality for astrology. So that's, it's beams, some kind of spiritual beams, right? But again, it's coming from that, which, Al-Kindi, he wrote a book called On the Stellar Rays. But it's like, the reason people are into it now is because, again, they're coming from an atheistic materialistic perspective. And so that's a shaky foundation to build a spiritual practice on, is the underlying view that there's nothing spiritual. It's just really, but philosophical consistency is not that important to most people. I was obsessed with it, but most people don't worry about that sort of stuff. They just get on with their lives. The problem is when that gets in your way. It's also sad too. It's like I think a lot of people have an innate spiritual, compassion and spiritual sense and all that sort of stuff, but they don't have any kind of officially that, it's like, life is meaningless and random, and, everything, you die and all that sort of stuff. And so it's sad, it's just interesting. There's no support officially for what they feel, So it's like Star Trek. They always talk about emotions being irrational. Oh, it's so irrational. It's like, no, it isn't, It's like, that's that weird, this is weird dichotomy, it's like that binary choice between, like, you're gonna have to be a fundamentalist Christian or an atheist scientist. You know what I mean? It's like, I refuse to accept either one of those as my outcome. Quit giving me these fake choices. I'm gonna do my own thing. You know, which is perfectly rational. Once you accept a spiritual worldview, right? Everything follows. It's all very logical. It makes a lot of sense. Now, you don't have to go one way or the other, but it's not crazy anymore. So I think that's one of the first things to say. Can I? Because as an attorney, I'm basically a rhetorician, right? Which is a persuasive logician. I have to think logically, but I also have to be persuasive. And so it's like, I want to have a logical basis for what I'm doing. I want to understand what I'm doing, And so that's really affected my astrological practice very strongly, because I want to have the same thing. I want to understand how this works. I don't want to just do it. Oh, it works. It's like, and that's good enough. I'm like, why? How does it work? What's the model? While recognizing that's just a model.
Yeah. Right.
Without saying this is reality and everybody else has to conform to my reality. It's like, this is the way to square the circle with, like this whole astromagia thing is like, these are different viewpoints, right?
Right.
So it's funny because my astromagia lecture is going to talk about, okay, these are potentially, it's logical that there's these viewpoints, there's these binary choices you can make, and how you define astrological magic, and people are going to fall along those different, possibilities. So it's like, you don't have to convince each other which is right, because if there is no objective reality, then we don't have to worry about the right one, right? But you don't have to be totally like subjective either, because that's not, we can compare it to reality. I mean, you can test stuff and see if it works or not. And that gives you some kind of testing of it. So, but that's my message really for the astrological community, is like, what, if we recognize that these are models, then we can recognize there's valid choices, they're different choices. And someone doesn't do the same thing I do, doesn't mean they're wrong. Right. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that anything goes either. Yeah. And that's hard for people to handle. It's either, well, I can do whatever I want. The funny thing about doing whatever you want is it happens to be the same as the 10,000 other people with the same worldview that you have. You know what I mean? So it's not unique at all. It's like advertising, like, be yourself by buying our product and being like the 100,000 other people with our product. It's like this fake individuality, and also this rebellion stuff that's been sold to people. Be rebellious, and the manipulation and the consumer capitalism stuff that comes through that. But so it's a middle path again in those.
So I do have another question for you, and this relates to every blade of grass having an angel, and this is so each talisman that you make has a different chart, right? And so, is there, in your opinion, is there a spirit of each individual talisman, or are they like a phone line to Mercury, for instance, or Venus, for instance? Or because there's Mercury in Gemini, there's Mercury in Virgo, there's, and every chart is totally different. You can't make the same exact talisman,
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff there. Okay, so first of all, why does it have to be any one? I mean, it's like the blind man and the elephant, the elephant's like a snake, no, the elephant's like it's like a wall. No, the elephant's like a column. You know what I mean? So you're getting pieces of the reality or descriptive. So no, it's this, no, it's that. It's like, well, you both are right. So it's interesting because I'm very strongly influenced by Japanese stuff and my Zen stuff, but also Shinto. You can see right behind me up there. That's what's called a kamidana.
Yeah.
Which is a Shinto altar that you would have in your house. And so it's got, kami, which are like, it's translated in English as gods, which is a very bad translation. It's really spirits is more how I translate it. And the Shinto is very, quote, animistic. I mean, everything's alive. So one of the things that they'll do is, in fact, this is interesting because this has got foxes as the guardians, white foxes, which are Inari, who's a very famous kami, rice and all sorts of different things like that. They have what they call divided spirits. So what I've got in there are called ofuda, which are like wooden plaques, which are like got kami in them, are connected to the kami, or however you want to conceptualize it. But the next step up is to have your own little shrine. And they do a special ceremony, and they take the spirit of the shrine and split it think of a candle. If I light the candle flame off of one and take the candle, I've got two burning candles. Are they separate or the same? So that's what they do with the spirits, right? And so that's what I would say about the Mercury spirit in the talisman, is that, of course, everything's got a unique spirit, but then it's been lit off of the main Mercury. It also is a phone line. Because it's connected, it's going to connect. You know what I mean? It's never stopped being connected. So it's all those things.
Yeah.
So now the chart stuff is interesting because here's what happens. People are coming out of modern astrology.
Yeah.
Modern astrology is all natal.
Uh-huh.
So it's like being a carpenter with only a hammer in your toolbox. So if there's a broken window, I'm going to take my hammer out. If it's a screw, I'm going to take my hammer out. It's like you only have one tool. So use natal for everything. And so that seems logical because that's all there is basically. And so what they'll do is, they've heard of people like, I have my chart and my partner's chart. So I'll compare the charts, which is logical because they're people, right? The problem with the talisman, it's not a person. So a talisman, okay, third house, the talisman is its neighbors. Its fourth is its family. Fifth is its children. Seventh is its spouse of the talisman. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not the same. Since it's not a human, right? What do those houses mean, right? And so you don't relate to the talisman the same way you relate to a human, right? So that's the problem with conceptually to me with the synastry of your chart. The other thing is the problem with modern astrology is to kind of make it up as you go along. And so the tendency would be very there's not a methodology, it'll be very random. So there's maybe 50 factors that could jump out at them. So they'll look at the chart and go, oh, look, I had somebody say to me, she said, oh, well, I don't know how they did some kind of combined chart of my husband and mine. And the midpoint of, the galactic vertex was sextile algol. And I was like, what? I mean, okay, I'm sure you can find something, you know what I mean? It's like,
right.
Look, I found it. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's like, you can find any way to connect any chart if you want to do it that way. You know what I mean? And so that's the problem, is no methodology, but that's what people say. Because people come to me and they'll say, well, you said that, because for example, let's say Venus is in Libra in their natal chart. I'm like, oh, well, that's great. Venus is really dignified. Venus talismans are good for you. You already have a good relationship with Venus. That's my conceptual model. This is my own thing. There's many ways to do it. When you particularly get into that, I don't insist mine's right by any means. But anyhow, that's what I do. And so they say, well, you've got 5 Venus talismans. Which one should I use? I'm like, I'm not able to tell you further other than Venus is compatible. And that's problematic because people would like me to say, well, this is the best one for you. And I'm like, I don't know that. It would be good for marketing, but I just can't bring myself to lie to myself first and then start lying to my clients about it because I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like, I can't honestly say that. So what I say now is I say, I like this one.
Yeah.
Like in the restaurant, like what do you, I say, oh, I like such and such. It doesn't mean it's going to be the best for you or you're going to like, this is what I like. So at least give people some help in that, which I can live with that. But I can't say to people always come to me and say, what's the best talisman for me? It's like saying, what's the best vacation for me?
Right.
What do you want to do?
Yeah.
But again, the natal is the focus. And so obviously the natal chart will tell me everything. And that's all you need to do is here's the natal chart. What's the best one for me? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, Venus is strong in your chart. Do you want a love talisman? Do you want Venus qualities? So it's one of those things is like, again, they have a model, which I recognize. So I need to work with their model. Right. but they don't understand that, and they don't know my model. So that could be problematic, because what people do is they'll come up with this convoluted stuff and they'll say, this is right, isn't it, Chris? And I'm like, well, I use a different method. And they're like, well, what about this? And I'm like, I don't know about that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's like, it's odd, because but then people won't use my method either. So I don't like your method, but I want you to sign off on my method. And I'm like, well, I don't. So I get into these weird tangles with customers from time to time about stuff like that. But it's one of those things. It's like, what's amazing is that we have an explosion of knowledge. So that anyone knows about the stuff at all is kind of incredible. So I'm grumbling about, but it's like these actually people have a pretty sophisticated knowledge of various stuff. And so that's cool. That talismans, 50 years ago, I would have been arrested for fraud for doing it, but people wouldn't even know what to do with it. Where now people are like, fixed stars, for example, that's the cutting edge thing. That's what I'd say, that's where people are getting into now. If you're kind of, they know about planets, so they're like moved into fixed stars as being the next hot thing. So that's kind of cool. But again, you give someone like a deccan talisman, they're just like, whoa, that's just a little too weird for people. So I had someone recently ask me, I was like, why don't you have this deccan? I'm like, dude, nobody wants to buy those talismans. They're just too weird. We'll do them from time to time, but it's just too odd for people. So you can't get too far ahead of the market with that kind of stuff. But
so I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
About when you're talking about guardian angels and everyone having a spirit, or spirits that take interest to them. Why do the celestial spirits care about the affairs of humans?
What I would say about that is that there's a whole range of different kinds of spirits, and they range from our point from being good to neutral to evil, and then also they range from being really interested in what we're doing to indifferent to they could care less. You know what I mean? So it's just the thing. The thing I'd say about the celestial, that they're the ones I'm working with, I think, Ficino talks about, he says there's this chain of, from stars to planets to people to material objects. It's also with the spirits as well. And so there's all sorts of different ways you can interface with this, like with Mars. You can interface at a demon level. You can interface at a sort of goetic spirit level. You can do it at a daemon level. You can do it at an archangelic level. And that's where I want to plug in, is at archangelic level. And the archangels, they're angelic, so they're benign. And their job is to be concerned about people. The guardian angel, that's what they do. That's what their purpose is. So everything has an angel, like every country has an angel. I think of that with the United States. It's like the archangel of the United States to me is like the Statue of Liberty. It's like, give me your tired, your huddled poor. That's very positive, liberty, equality, all that sort of stuff. The demon of America is, I get the sense of like having like almost like a Syrian, like eagle head, and covered with armor, like the seal of the United States, and it's like dripping with blood, kind of thing.
Blood
like that's the shadow side. That's the shadow side. You got the light side and the dark side, But the angels, their job is to be, they do things like, and angel means angelus, a messenger. They have work to do. Like angel of death doesn't like killing people, but that's their job, And so the angels that are concerned with us, that's because that's what their job is to do. It kind of reminds me, have you ever seen the movie, it's in German, it's called Der Himmel über Berlin, but it's the Wings of Desire. And it's a Wim Wenders film. And it's really trippy because it's about angels. And so they have all these scenes in Berlin where the wall was there, and the angels they're basically recording, they're noticing things. And so everywhere they go, the people can't see, and children can see the angels, but the average person can't see them. And there's all these, they're funny. They dress in like overcoats and have ponytails. And so they're just watching everything, recording everything. And, it's so funny because people get freaked out, and sometimes they'll just like, put their arm on the shoulder, and then the person like feels better. It's like, and I've had that experience. Robert Zoller, my teacher, said that the angels work, he said, per modum suadensis, by persuasion, by implanting thoughts or ideas in you. So, I've had situations where I'm really freaked out, and then I'll suddenly be like, oh, but I don't need to worry about that. You know what I mean? And that to me is like, that's an angelic, that's a guardian angel, and so that's what I would say about it, is that they're very benign beings, but they're super powerful. Another thing that's interesting, like, the modern fiction, like Neil Gaiman, am I pronouncing that correctly? Gaiman? I don't know. Again, I read everything, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
No, that's cool.
But same thing with that. And the guy that wrote his Dark Materials, Golden Compass.
Yeah.
What's interesting about both those books is that the weakness of this of like angels in those. They're defeatable by humans,
Right.
you know? And it's that whole, again, atheistic, materialistic kind of like exaltation of the ego self, right? You're
Yeah.
so powerful that you can defeat, archangel. I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, to me, like the archangel of Jupiter is so powerful and so beyond me. It's like, to me, it's like being in the presence of a judge. I mean, again, as a lawyer,
Yeah.
that's my thing.
I want to
like,
wear a
whoa.
blazer.
I know exactly. Like, I want to be very respectful.
Yeah.
And it's like this idea that, see, the Solomonic approach is to order them around. But I don't think you're dealing with that powerful spirits if you're able to order them around.
True.
I mean, ultimately, I just don't think they're that powerful. So that's what I would say about it, is that's my conceptualization of it. That's how I approach it. But that's what I'd say is these super powerful beings that are very positive, and just to be able to hang out with them is a privilege, and it's transformative and uplifting just to be in their presence. And so that I like it. But see, some people like that, and some people like want to do sorcery. So I'm like, okay, it's sort of like some are born to sweet delight and some are born to endless night. I mean, everybody has a dharma,
Yeah.
It's like Blake through the doors, all my classical knowledge is filtered through pop culture. But but that's what I would say about it, is just like, luckily I haven't been called upon. It's funny though, because I say that too. It's like I'm saying I don't have to do a vessel of wrath. It's like, except I do evictions. Like, that's some pretty heinous stuff. I remember when starting off, but the reason I do them is like, because basically it's dealing with problem tenants. I have these small landlords because I do both landlords and tenants. I have a weird practice. I represent both. And so the landlords, I mean, you can't have somebody who's like, for example, we had a situation where someone let their pit bulls run free in a mobile home park, and they finally bit this kid. And so, and the person wouldn't stop. Even after that, she was letting the dogs run free. So we had to evict her. So it's like for the safety of the rest of the tenants.
Yeah.
So, but it's a pretty rough. That's like, the legal thing is like the sword and the scales.
Totally.
That's the sword side of it.
Right.
Well, that's what I say is like, even though I say, oh, I don't want to be a vessel of wrath, it's like, in that sense, I am a vessel of wrath.
Yeah.
So it's like, so that's what I would say. Each of us basically has, we have a dharma. Each of them has a duty, and we fulfill ours, and the angels fulfill theirs by being concerned about us.
Yeah. An ordered cosmos.
Yes, very much. And some chaos too.
Yeah, sure.
This is like, it couldn't be, it has to be a little bit of craziness and stuff that goes on. It's like, just look at look at our, 2022. It's like, obviously there's chaos, has
absolutely.
Yeah. But there's wiggle room too. I mean, and
yes,
when I look at this karma as habit, right? So there is possible, if there is free will, it's the ability to change your habits. And so you can, but then there's like inborn.
I don't know about free will.
Right. It's something.
I mean, I'm an astrologer, so we tend to be votaries of fate. You know what I mean? Which is so unpopular.
But you're also a magician, and magicians kind of,
I mean, it's funny because I did this rat. My only pest control talisman, my only malefic talisman, was the first one I did in 1998. And I said at the end of it, you can see on my website, it says Rats Be Gone, it talks about it. At the end of it, I said, I don't know whether I announced that or I caused it. So that's what I would say about them. I mean, to be a magician, you need to come from a perspective of will, because you got to take action.
Yeah.
But whether or not the ego self is the cause of that, it's like, I don't know. I mean, the thing about it is that the modern God is the ego self, right?
Yeah.
And how many movies have you seen where it's like, for example, Adjustment Bureau? Have you seen that movie?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Adjustment Bureau is like, it's from a Philip K. Dick story.
Okay.
And it's about this guy who's a politician, and he steps off the path, so to speak. So there's these guys, like angel guys, that have like a plan, and they got to get everybody back on the plan again. And the end of the movie is he's like, screw fate, that's a trope. And that's kind of thing is like, I don't have to, I don't, and that was like, that's much more popular modern. Now the more traditional approach is the death in the marketplace trope. Now, and what that is that, so a guy is like, he sees, I mean, I'm not, if I remember it, shoot. Oh yeah, he sees death, right? And death sort of was waves to him. and he's in like, whatever, Samarkand or whatever. So like, oh shit. So he freaks out. He runs home. He gets on his horse and rides as fast as he can by night. And he finally arrives in, whatever, 100 miles away in like Tehran or whatever. And then he's walking into the marketplace and the devil says, oh yeah, I saw you in Samarkand. I was going to tell you I was going to meet you in Tehran.
Right. Yeah.
That's a more traditional book. Because I think the older, before now, you didn't have air conditioning and all this sort of stuff, and lights and all that. And this myth that we don't, we're separate. I mean, people had much more precarious lives. And I think they could see fate much more clearly. Totally. And so that's what I would say is like, I mean, just look at climate change.
Yeah.
Is something going to be done about climate change?
No.
Really? I mean, it's just like, we can't help it. And even though you can see it, we're just locked into it. We can't even help it. I still turn on my air conditioner.
I still drive my car.
Exactly. It's like, and we tell each other we tell these stories about it, but that's the saying is like the free will though is like, free will is, I think for the most part, a potentiality. Because insofar as like, okay, I want a Mercedes. Is that free will? Or is that something that's been implanted in you? It's a desire, exactly, that's been manipulated through, consumer capitalist marketing or whatever. I mean, how much of what we want is truly, and then what we want is who we are, I love court. I love it. There's nothing. I mean, I just love it so much. It's like, well, that's because that's what I was made to do. My cat, he loves to hunt. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's his dharma. He's wonderful at it. He's beautiful at it. But is that a free will choice of his?
No, not.
Exactly. How much can we point to free will? So that's what I would say about it, is it is an important perspective though, insofar as it appears to be a choice, you want to make the right choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is it's like, insofar as you can choose, you want to make that choice that's positive, that has a good rebirth, right? Or is an enlightenment choice. If that's your path.